For 12 years, Sheridan Montgomery loved one man in complete silence. He wasn't just older. He wasn't just one of Atlanta's most powerful CEOs. He was her brother's best friend. So she buried those feelings and built the career she'd always dreamed of. Until one ordinary Thursday, she lost everything. With her future suddenly uncertain, the last person Sheridan ever expected to offer her a second chance was the one man she'd spent years trying to forget. Working for Elijah King was supposed to be simple, be professional, prove she deserved the opportunity, and never let old feelings get in the way. But sometimes the biggest changes in our lives begin with the worst day we've ever had. This is episode 1 of The Line We Cross. Sheridan Montgomery didn't flinch when the HR director said the words. Effective immediately, your position has been eliminated. The sentence landed hard anyway. For a moment, Sheridan focused on the view behind the woman's shoulder instead of the pressure building in her chest. Atlanta's skyline glowed gold in the late afternoon sun, sharp and expensive through the floor-to-ceiling windows. 7 years ago, that view had felt like proof she'd made it. Today, it felt like a witness. The HR director slid a folder across the glass conference table. Your severance package is outlined here. We're also offering executive transition support. Executive transition support. Corporate language for we already replaced you. Sheridan rested one manicured hand lightly on the folder but didn't open it. Was there an issue with my performance? The woman hesitated. Not long. Just long enough. No, she admitted carefully. This decision came from restructuring at the senior level. Sheridan almost laughed. Restructuring. Strategic realignment. Organizational shifts. She'd spent enough years in corporate rooms to know the translation. Someone more convenient survived the cut. Across the glass wall outside the conference room, 2 associates abruptly looked away when they noticed her watching. News had already started spreading. Of course it had. Humiliation moved faster than email. You'll have 30 minutes to collect your personal belongings, the HR director added, softening her tone like kindness could make this less insulting. 30 minutes. 7 years of 80-hour weeks. 7 years of fixing disasters no one else could solve. 7 years of being the smartest person in rooms full of men who hated that she was smarter. Reduced to 30 minutes and a cardboard box. Sheridan stood smoothly, adjusting the sleeve of her cream silk blouse. I'll have legal review the severance package before I sign anything. The HR director blinked, visibly relieved to be dealing with professionalism instead of emotion. That almost irritated Sheridan more. The elevator ride down felt endless. Her reflection stared back at her from the mirrored walls. Flawless makeup, fresh retwist, posture straight enough to survive war. Nobody looking at her would know her entire life had just tilted sideways. The doors opened onto her floor. Conversations stopped. Not fully, just enough. Sheridan walked past rows of half-curious, half-guilty faces without slowing down. Her assistant, Brianna, stood near her office holding an empty box against her chest. I'm so sorry, Sherry. Don't. Sheridan's voice wasn't cold, just tired. Please. Pity was the one thing she couldn't survive today. Inside her office, everything looked untouched. The white desk, the crystal vase of orchids she bought herself every Monday because no one else ever thought to celebrate her wins. The framed Georgia Tech degree, the skyline she used to love. Sheridan set her bag down slowly. This office had been the first place she ever felt financially safe. And somehow she'd still never fully belonged here. Brianna hovered awkwardly near the door. What do you want me to pack? Sheridan looked around the room carefully, forcing herself to separate what mattered from what didn't. Just the contacts binder, she said finally. Leave the rest. Because if she took everything, it would look like she planned to come back. And if she took nothing, it would look like they'd broken her. So she chose the middle. At 33, Sheridan had built the kind of life people envied online. Georgia Tech degrees in cybersecurity and business. 6-figure salary. Luxury apartment overlooking Midtown. Designer heels purchased without checking the price tag first. From the outside, she looked successful. But sitting alone at her kitchen island 3 hours later, staring at a cardboard box full of office awards and tangled charger cords. Sheridan realized how fragile success felt when a corporation could erase your identity before lunch. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. Too quiet. Her hand reached for her phone before she could second-guess herself. Malcolm answered on the second ring. "What's up, Sherry?" She swallowed hard. "I got laid off today." Silence. Then the sound of ice clinking softly in a glass. "Damn," Malcolm muttered. His voice changed immediately, less teasing, more protective. "You okay?" Sheridan stared down at the marble countertop beneath her fingertips. No, she wasn't okay. She was angry, embarrassed, scared of how quickly fear could creep in after stability disappeared. But Sheridan had spent most of her adult life mastering the art of looking unaffected. "Do I sound okay?" she asked instead. Malcolm exhaled quietly. "You sound like you're trying very hard to." That nearly cracked her. Sheridan reached for the wine beside her and took a slow sip. "I didn't call because I need fixing." "I know. I called because—" Her throat tightened unexpectedly. "Because I needed somebody to know before LinkedIn did." Malcolm's expression softened. Even through the screen, she could see him shifting fully into Big Brother mode. "You were too good for that place anyway." Sheridan laughed once under her breath. "That sounds inspirational until rent is due." It also happens to be true. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Malcolm leaned back in his chair, studying her carefully. "Actually," he said slowly, "I might know somebody looking for exactly your skill set." Sheridan immediately narrowed her eyes. "Malcolm, what?" "That tone means you already made a decision without asking me." His grin answered before he did. Her phone buzzed against the counter. Malcolm Carter shared contact. Elijah King, King Holdings. Sheridan stared at the screen. Her stomach dropped instantly. Elijah King wasn't just Malcolm's best friend. He was the Elijah King, CEO, investor, corporate prodigy, the kind of man business magazines called visionary and intimidating in the same sentence. Unfortunately, he was also the same man Sheridan had spent years trying and failing not to want. "You cannot be serious." Malcolm looked entirely too pleased with himself. "He needs a senior strategy lead." "He needs therapy," Sheridan muttered automatically. Malcolm barked out a laugh. "Probably, but he also needs somebody smart enough to challenge him." Sheridan leaned back in her chair, gripping the stem of her wine glass tighter than necessary. Working for Elijah was a terrible idea. Professionally dangerous. Emotionally worse. Because Elijah had never treated her like Malcolm's little sister exactly. And Sheridan had never been able to decide if that made things better or infinitely more complicated. "You already sent him my resume, didn't you?" she asked quietly. Malcolm took a sip of wine, completely unashamed. "Interviews already set." Sheridan closed her eyes. Of course it was. The elevator doors opened onto the executive floor with unsettling quiet. Sheridan stepped into a lobby so polished it barely looked real. Cream marble reflected the morning light pouring through the windows, and somewhere overhead, soft instrumental music hummed beneath the silence. King Holdings didn't feel corporate. Felt controlled. Every detail, from the black walnut reception desk to the minimalist artwork mounted against stone walls, seemed designed to remind visitors exactly who held power here. Sheridan adjusted her grip on her portfolio and walked toward reception, her heels clicking steadily against the marble. The receptionist glanced up immediately. "Ms. Montgomery?" Sheridan nodded once. "I'm here for my 10:30 with Mr. King." The woman tapped something on her tablet before offering a professional smile. "He's expecting you. Please take the private elevator to the penthouse level." Penthouse. Sheridan kept her expression neutral, but internally, irritation flickered. Of course, Elijah interviewed candidates in the penthouse. Nothing about that man understood moderation. As she crossed toward the glass elevator, she caught her reflection in the mirrored wall. Navy blazer dress, gold hoops, posture sharp enough to survive interrogation. The outfit had taken entirely too much thought this morning. Professional but not cold. Elegant but not performative. And if she was being painfully honest with herself, not desperate. That bothered her more than it should have. The elevator climbed in near silence, Atlanta unfolding beneath her in widening layers of steel and sunlight. Sheridan folded her hands tightly in front of her before she could start adjusting invisible flaws. You are not here because he's attractive. You are here because you need a job. A very high-paying job. Preferably one that didn't come with emotional complications attached to Malcolm's best friend. The penthouse doors slid open. And suddenly, breathing required concentration. Elijah King stood near the windows with his back partially turned, one hand in his pocket while he finished a phone call. The skyline stretched behind him in sheets of gold and glass, but Sheridan barely noticed it. He looked older than the last time she'd seen him. Not older in a bad way. Sharper. The kind of sharpness that came from pressure, lack of sleep, and carrying too much responsibility for too long. When he turned, his gaze landed on her immediately. Not politely, intentionally. Sheridan hated the way that look still affected her. Elijah. Sheridan. His voice had deepened over the years. Rougher around the edges. Less effortless charm, more restraint. For a second, neither of them moved. Then Elijah ended the call and crossed the room toward her. You cut your hair, he said. Sheridan blinked once, caught off guard. A few inches. His gaze lingered briefly near her shoulders before returning to her face. It suits you. The compliment shouldn't have mattered. The fact that it did immediately irritated her. Elijah gestured toward the seating area instead of the massive desk dominating the office. Sit. Sheridan sat carefully, refusing to look intimidated by the penthouse, the skyline, or the man standing across from her in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her first apartment. Elijah remained standing for a moment, studying her with quiet focus before finally taking the chair opposite hers. No small talk. No performative charm. Interesting. I reviewed your Henderson merger work last night, he said. You caught liabilities 3 firms missed. Sheridan crossed one leg over the other. Their firms were looking at numbers. I was looking at behavior. That earned the faintest shift in his expression. Not surprise exactly. Recognition. Elaborate. The CEO was stalling negotiations every Thursday. Sheridan shrugged lightly. Turns out his mistress lived in Miami, and his expense reports were sloppier before weekend flights. Elijah stared at her for 2 full seconds. Then he laughed quietly. Not the polished public laugh she'd heard at galas and charity dinners. A real one. And somehow that felt more dangerous. You weaponized accounting patterns. I weaponized arrogance, Sheridan corrected. The accounting just confirmed it. Something unreadable moved across Elijah's face then. Admiration, maybe, or relief. Like he'd been surrounded by people pretending to think strategically for too long. He leaned back slightly in his chair. Malcolm says you're difficult. Sheridan arched a brow. Malcolm thinks women who disagree with him are difficult. That explains a lot about his dating history. The response slipped out before Sheridan could stop herself. A grin tugged unexpectedly at Elijah's mouth. There it was. That dimple. The one she'd spent years pretending not to notice. Sheridan immediately looked away toward the windows, annoyed at herself for noticing it at all. Elijah noticed anyway. His expression shifted subtly, not smug exactly, but aware. And that awareness changed the air in the room. He slid a folder across the table toward her. Kingsley Infrastructure. Sheridan glanced down but didn't touch it yet. The acquisition everyone says is impossible? Elaborate on everyone. The board. Financial media. Half the city. Elijah leaned forward slightly, forearms resting against his knees. Good. Means they'll underestimate us. The word landed harder than it should have. Sheridan finally opened the folder. The numbers were ugly. Supply chain instability. Patent control issues. Massive political resistance. And underneath all of it, fear. She looked back up slowly. This isn't just a hostile acquisition. No. Elijah. He held her gaze evenly. Their CEO refuses to sell to a black-owned company. The room went quiet. Not awkward quiet, Heavy quiet. Sheridan sat back slowly, studying him differently now. There it is. Not ego. Not greed. Personal. For the first time since walking into the penthouse, Elijah looked less like an untouchable CEO and more like a man carrying exhaustion behind expensive tailoring. You still want it anyway, she said quietly. His jaw tightened slightly. Now I do. Sheridan looked back down at the file. This wasn't safe territory. Not professionally. Not emotionally. Because she understood that tone in his voice. It was the same tone she used right before refusing to lose. You're offering me a VP-level role after one conversation, she said carefully. I'm offering you influence. That's not the same thing. No, Elijah agreed. It's more dangerous. That answer should have been a red flag. Instead, Sheridan felt her pulse quicken, which was exactly the problem. Elijah studied her for another long moment before speaking again. There are conditions. Sheridan looked up immediately. Conditions. No triangulation through Malcolm. His tone sharpened slightly. If we disagree, we handle it directly. Reasonable. Probably necessary. And you report to me exclusively. Sheridan narrowed her eyes. That sounds dangerously close to micromanagement. A tired smile flickered briefly across Elijah's face. Trust me, I don't have the energy to micromanage you. There it was again. Not perfection. Fatigue. Sheridan noticed the loosened cufflink near his wrist. The faint shadows beneath his eyes. The cold coffee sitting untouched near the edge of the desk. For the first time in years, Elijah King looked human. And somehow that made him harder to resist. He reached into his desk drawer and slid a black keycard toward her. Penthouse clearance, he said. Your office would be next to mine. Would be. Not is. He still expected her to choose. Sheridan picked up the card slowly, her fingers brushing his for less than a second. Electric. Annoyingly electric. You always recruit this aggressively? She asked lightly. No. The answer came too quickly. And that was the first moment Sheridan realized Elijah might be struggling through this conversation just as much as she was. Monday morning arrived with rain. Not dramatic thunderstorm rain. The quieter kind. Steady. Gray. The sort of weather that turned Atlanta's skyline into blurred steel and made everyone in the city just a little less patient. Sheridan stepped off the penthouse elevator at 8:02 a.m. and immediately felt the shift in attention. Conversations softened. Keyboards slowed. People looked up. King Holdings' executive floor operated like a machine, efficient, polished, controlled. But Sheridan still recognized curiosity when she saw it, especially the kind directed at her. She walked past glass offices and assistants balancing coffee trays without slowing her pace. Her black dress was simple from the front. Long sleeves, high neckline, tailored perfectly to her frame. The back was another story. The open cut exposed the smooth line of her spine almost to her waist. Not inappropriate, but bold enough to make a statement. Professional. Unforgettable. Exactly the balance she intended. If people were going to stare anyway, Sheridan preferred giving them a reason, and in turn nearly collided with the glass strategy suite door trying to open it for her. Morning, Ms. Montgomery. Nervous people make mistakes, Sheridan said calmly as she walked past him. Slow down. The poor kid looked both terrified and grateful. Inside her office, the skyline stretched endlessly beyond the windows, washed silver by the rain. A crystal vase sat in the center of her desk. Black calla lilies. Sheridan stopped. Of course. Her fingertips brushed one velvet dark petal before she exhaled quietly through her nose. Beautiful flowers. Funeral flowers. A message, somehow. Or maybe she was overthinking everything now because Elijah King had disrupted her entire nervous system in less than 72 hours. You're frowning at them. Sheridan didn't jump at the sound of Elijah's voice behind her, though her pulse reacted immediately anyway. She looked at his reflection in the glass before turning fully. Navy suit today. No tie. Coffee in one hand. He looked tired. Not exhausted exactly, but worn around the edges in a way she hadn't noticed during the interview. There were faint shadows beneath his eyes, and his cufflinks didn't match. That detail unsettled her more than it should have. Elijah King struck her as the type of man who noticed everything. "Lilies are funeral flowers," Sheridan said. He stepped into the office slowly. "In some places, they symbolize rebirth." "You Googled flower meanings before sending them?" A flicker of amusement crossed his face. "No. My grandmother liked them." That softened something unexpectedly inside her. Sheridan turned back toward the flowers to hide it. Dangerous. Humanizing him felt dangerous. She sensed Elijah stop beside her rather than behind her this time. Close enough to feel his warmth. Far enough to remain careful. "You accepted the offer fast," he said. Sheridan glanced sideways. "You made the offer fast. I expected negotiation. I considered it. But..." She crossed her arms lightly. "I got laid off on a Thursday and recruited into a penthouse office by Monday morning. I figured the universe was either rewarding me or setting me up." That earned a quiet laugh from him. Real again. Not the polished public version. "You always this suspicious?" "Yes." "Good." His gaze drifted toward the Kingsley files on her desk. "You'll need that here." Sheridan walked toward the desk and opened the folder. Several pages of notes already sat beside it in neat handwriting. Elijah noticed immediately. "You've already started." She looked up. "You expected me not to?" "I expected you to wait for full access." Sheridan flipped another page. "I didn't need full access to spot problems." He moved closer to the desk, eyes scanning her notes. Shipping vulnerabilities. Board instability. Supply chain pressure points. Then his expression changed slightly. Not anger. Surprise. "You got into their logistics records?" "I got into publicly available shipping data," Sheridan corrected. "Their CFO is sloppy. Half their vendors are overbilling them because nobody bothered auditing route redundancies." Elijah picked up one page, studying her notes carefully. For the first time since meeting him again, Sheridan watched him lose composure. Not entirely, but enough to matter. His focus sharpened. His posture changed. Interest became respect. And somehow that affected her more than the flirting had. "You did this over the weekend?" he asked. "I don't spiral well." The answer slipped out before she could stop it. Elijah looked up immediately. There it is, Sheridan thought. Too honest. But instead of exploiting the vulnerability, his expression shifted subtly. Understanding. "You think losing that job changed your value?" he said quietly. Sheridan stiffened. "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." The room went still. Sheridan hated how accurately he'd read her. She'd spent days convincing herself she wasn't humiliated, that she wasn't angry, that she didn't secretly feel disposable after being escorted out of a building she helped make profitable. And somehow Elijah saw it anyway. She closed the folder a little harder than necessary. "I came here to work, not psychoanalyze each other." A beat of silence passed. Then Elijah nodded once. "Fair." That surprised her too. Most powerful men pushed harder when challenged. Elijah adjusted course instead. "All right," he said calmly. "Work, then." He moved around the desk beside her, close enough for sandalwood and coffee to blur together in the air between them. Sheridan focused very carefully on breathing normally. "Elaborate on Kingsley," he said. She launched into strategy immediately, grateful for the distraction. "Their board is fractured. Their CFO is desperate. And their CEO thinks legacy matters more than liquidity." Sheridan pointed toward one highlighted section. "Which means he'll make emotional decisions if pressured correctly." Elijah leaned one hand against the desk beside her, reading over the file. "You like pressure." She glanced at him. "I like leverage." "That sounds healthier." "It probably isn't." His mouth twitched. Again that almost smile. Sheridan suddenly understood why people found him intimidating. It wasn't his money or reputation. It was restraint. Elijah felt like a man constantly choosing control instead of instinct. And she had a growing suspicion she was becoming one of those instincts. "You realize," he said slowly, still studying her notes, "that you rewrote half my acquisition strategy in 48 hours. Sheridan shrugged lightly, though pride warmed quietly beneath her ribs. Your original approach was too clean. That got his full attention. Explain. You were trying to win respectfully. Sheridan met his gaze directly now. Kingsley's leadership already decided they don't respect you, so stop asking for permission to beat them. Silence. Not offended silence. Processing silence. Elijah stared at her for several seconds before exhaling slowly through his nose. There it is, he murmured. Sheridan frowned slightly. What? The reason Malcolm said you scare board members. She rolled her eyes. Men call women intimidating when they can't control the room anymore. No, Elijah said quietly. Intimidating is when somebody forces you to rethink your own strategy in real time. The compliment landed harder than she wanted it to. Sheridan looked away first. Mistake. Because the second she did, Elijah's attention dropped briefly to the exposed line of her back reflected in the window glass. And lingered. The air shifted again. Subtle. Dangerous. Sheridan felt it immediately. So did he. Elijah straightened slowly and stepped back half a pace, reclaiming control with visible effort. Smart decision. For both of them. Then he reached toward the vase, removed one black calla lily, and turned it slowly between his fingers. What's the play tonight? Sheridan asked, mostly to break the tension. Elijah looked at her over the flower. Dinner. Her pulse stumbled once. Professional. Keep this professional. To discuss Kingsley? She asked carefully. A pause. Then, to discuss whatever we haven't been discussing. There it was. Not flirting anymore. Honesty. And somehow honesty felt far more dangerous between them than attraction ever had. Sheridan stared at the calla lily on her desk long after Elijah left her office. The flower felt strangely deliberate now. Not romantic. Not innocent either. A signal. Outside the glass walls of her office, the executive floor had resumed movement, but the atmosphere had changed subtly around her. Conversations quieted when she walked past. Analysts glanced up too quickly. Assistants suddenly found reasons to linger near the strategy wing. People noticed things at King Holdings, especially proximity to Elijah King. Her phone buzzed again. Malcolm. Third call that morning. Sheridan silenced it without answering, just as Elijah's chief of staff appeared in her doorway. Danielle moved with military precision. Burgundy suit immaculate, tablet tucked beneath one arm, expression unreadable in the way only longtime executive staff perfected. But her eyes flicked briefly toward the flower tucked beside Sheridan's keyboard. Interesting. Mr. King asked me to clear your afternoon, Danielle said. Sheridan frowned slightly. For what? Danielle tapped her screen once and rotated the tablet toward her. A calendar invite filled the display. King/Kingsley Strategy Review. 8:30 a.m. Penthouse Conference Room. Tomorrow. Sheridan blinked once, then twice. You scheduled a board presentation tomorrow? She asked carefully. Mr. King did. We don't even have a finalized acquisition strategy. Danielle's expression never shifted. He said you'd understand the urgency. That sounded exactly like Elijah. Aggressive, confident, completely unwilling to wait for consensus before making a move. Sheridan leaned back slowly in her chair, irritation mixing dangerously with adrenaline. Across the bullpen, Elijah moved behind the glass walls of his office, phone pressed to his ear. Even from a distance, she could see tension in the set of his shoulders. He looked like a man preparing for war, and apparently he expected her beside him. Danielle hesitated before adding, He also asked me to tell you not to leave early. Sheridan looked up sharply. Excuse me? The faintest hint of amusement touched Danielle's mouth. His exact words were, If Sheridan disappears before midnight, we lose $12 million. Then she walked away before Sheridan could respond. Sheridan stared after her for a full second, then muttered under her breath, Arrogant man. But she was already opening the Kingsley files again. The rest of the afternoon disappeared into numbers, leverage points, and controlled chaos. Sheridan worked through financial statements, shipping reports, and internal projections until Atlanta's skyline darkened outside her office windows. Rain clouds rolled over the city in heavy shades of blue-gray, while lights flickered awake across Midtown. By 6:30, half the executive floor had gone home. Elijah hadn't. Neither had she. Sheridan rubbed one hand over her eyes before refocusing on the spreadsheet glowing across her monitor. The calla lily sat beside her keyboard, dark petals almost black beneath the office lighting. Funeral flower. Rebirth flower. Maybe both. Her computer chimed with a new message. Waiting. Just one word. From Elijah. Sheridan stared at the text longer than necessary. No punctuation. No explanation. Waiting. The worst part was that she instantly knew what he meant. Dinner. Work. Whatever this thing was becoming between them. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Finishing slides. She deleted the response before sending it. Let him wait a little. He deserved that much. By the time Sheridan stepped into the Escalade outside King Holdings, the rain had stopped. Atlanta shimmered beneath wet streets and reflected neon, the city glowing gold and crimson through the tinted windows. Sheridan leaned back against the cool leather seat and exhaled slowly for what felt like the first time all day. She changed before leaving the office. The black dress from earlier had started feeling too sharp, too aware of itself after Elijah's lingering attention. Now she wore a cream silk blouse tucked into a navy pencil skirt, still polished, but softer somehow. That realization irritated her immediately. You are not dressing for him. The driver glanced at her briefly through the rearview mirror. Traffic's clear tonight, Ms. Montgomery. 7 minutes. Sheridan nodded absently, tightening her grip on the Kingsley binder resting in her lap. Inside the folder, pressed carefully between handwritten notes and shipping reports, lay the black calla lily Elijah had tucked behind her ear earlier. She hadn't meant to keep it, which somehow made keeping it worse. The city blurred past outside the window while Sheridan replayed the day in dangerous fragments. The way Elijah looked at her strategy notes. The way he listened when she challenged him. The exhaustion she caught hiding beneath his composure. The quiet honesty in his voice when he stopped performing CEO and started speaking like a man. That part unsettled her most, because Sheridan knew how to resist charm. Honesty was harder. The elevator doors opened directly into Elijah's penthouse. Sheridan stepped into warmth, low lighting, and the faint scent of sandalwood. The space looked less like a home and more like a carefully constructed refuge from pressure minimalist furniture, dark stone, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. But the real evidence of Elijah's state of mind sat scattered across the living room. Contracts, financial reports, marked-up acquisition drafts, 3 untouched cups of coffee. Work had consumed the penthouse long before she arrived. Elijah stood near the windows with his back partially turned, sleeves rolled to his forearms, tie loosened at the collar. The skyline painted him in shades of blue and gold while one hand braced against the glass. He looked tired, not weak, never weak, but tired in a way that made Sheridan suddenly understand how much pressure he carried without showing it. "You're late," he said without turning around. His voice sounded rougher than usual. Sheridan set her portfolio down beside the scattered contracts. "You scheduled a board presentation without telling me." She removed her watch slowly. "We're even now." That finally made him turn. His gaze moved over her once. Cream silk blouse, loosened hair, heels abandoned near the elevator. And something in his expression shifted briefly before settling again. "You changed," he said quietly. Sheridan crossed her arms lightly. "Into something less confrontational." "That wasn't the word I was going to use." The answer hung between them longer than it should have. Then Elijah crossed the room and handed her a glass of bourbon. His fingers brushed the inside of her wrist. Small contact, huge mistake. Sheridan felt it immediately. Apparently so did he, because his jaw tightened slightly before he stepped back again. Control. Always control. "Elijah," she said carefully, accepting the glass. "What exactly happened today?" A slow exhale left him. Then, Kingsley's CFO folded faster than expected. Sheridan blinked once. "You pressured him already?" I applied leverage. You threatened him. Pause. I presented possibilities. Sheridan stared at him over the rim of her glass before taking a slow sip of bourbon. God help her. That almost made her smile. Sheridan took another sip of bourbon before reaching for the revised contracts spread across Elijah's coffee table. The warmth of the liquor settled low in her chest, taking the edge off the tension without dulling it completely. Nothing could dull this room completely. Not with Elijah standing 3 feet away looking like exhaustion wrapped in expensive tailoring. She flipped through the acquisition edits carefully, scanning line items and retention clauses while the fire crackled softly behind them. Then she stopped. Her eyes narrowed. Sheridan tapped one clause sharply with her nail. This wasn't in the original proposal. Elijah glanced down at the page. No. You guaranteed workforce retention. It mattered. Sheridan looked up immediately. Sentiment doesn't win acquisitions. Elijah stepped closer to the table, one hand braced against the edge beside her. Neither does bleeding talent. His knuckles brushed hers briefly as he reached for his glass. Small contact, still impossible to ignore. You taught me that, he added quietly. Sheridan looked at him for a moment longer than necessary, because there it was again, that strange combination of ruthlessness and restraint that made Elijah difficult to predict. He could pressure a CFO into folding by noon and still protect employees he'd never met. Complicated her read on him, which made him dangerous. She leaned back slightly, letting her eyes drift across the spread of documents, financial projections, and handwritten notes scattered across the penthouse. And then she noticed dinner. Not catered executive food. Not performative luxury. Her favorites: seared scallops, truffle risotto, chocolate torte from the restaurant Malcolm took her to every birthday. Sheridan's chest tightened unexpectedly. Elijah noticed her noticing. Eat, he said, loosening his collar another fraction. Before it gets cold. Sheridan studied him carefully before finally sitting at the dining table. You always feed your executives during hostile takeovers? No, Elijah sat across from her. Just the ones threatening to rewrite my entire strategy. That almost made her smile. Almost. She cut into a scallop while Elijah poured another finger of bourbon into his glass. Firelight flickered across the sharp angles of his face, catching silver strands near his temples Sheridan hadn't noticed before tonight. He looked tired. Not ordinary tired. The kind of exhaustion that came from carrying too much responsibility for too long while pretending it weighed nothing. And for some reason, that affected her more than his money or reputation ever had. You're staring again, Elijah said quietly. Sheridan took her time swallowing before answering. You look exhausted. A rough laugh escaped him. Long day threatening corporate collapse. You mean leveraging, right? Corporate leveraging. Sheridan shook her head lightly, but warmth tugged unexpectedly at the corners of her mouth. Elijah noticed that too. Of course he did. You were right about the shipping routes, he said, leaning back in his chair. Your Savannah reroute analysis saved us $12 million. $12 million is a good start, Sheridan replied. But Kingsley's board still won't fold voluntarily. Elijah's fingers tightened slightly around his bourbon glass. Sheridan noticed immediately. They will when they realize they're cornered. He reached for a manila envelope on the table and slid satellite images toward her. Shipping ports. Cargo routes. Infrastructure maps. Sheridan froze halfway through turning a page. These are from yesterday. Yes. She looked up sharply. You had me followed. Elijah didn't even blink. I had the ports monitored. That sounds legally questionable. So did hacking shipping manifests. Sheridan opened her mouth, then closed it again. Fair. God. She hated when he matched her energy this well. Elijah leaned forward, forearms resting against his knees now. More relaxed. More dangerous. We hit Kingsley with logistics first, he explained, tapping one image. Then financial exposure. Then we give them a way to survive the fallout. Sheridan studied the binder he slid toward her next. The strategy was precise, aggressive, elegant, and deeply familiar. Her pulse skipped once as realization settled in. This was exactly how she would have built the presentation. "You already anticipated my approach," she said quietly. Elijah held her gaze evenly. "I pay attention." That answer did something deeply unhelpful to her nervous system. Sheridan flipped through the presentation pages carefully while trying not to think about how closely this man had apparently studied the way her mind worked. "You want me presenting this with you?" "I want us presenting it together." Us again. That word was becoming a problem. Elijah stood and moved beside her chair, pointing toward the financial projections over her shoulder. The heat from his body settled close enough to distract her immediately. "You handle operational pressure points," he said. "I handle financial exposure." Sheridan glanced up at him. "Good cop, terrifying cop?" A faint grin tugged at his mouth. "You think you're the good cop?" She looked back down at the projections. "Fair point." The fire popped softly behind them. Sheridan closed the presentation binder slowly, thinking. "Then, there's a flaw." Elijah straightened slightly. "Go on. We're showing too much too early." Sheridan turned in her chair to face him fully now. "Kingsley's board needs to think they still have negotiating power." Elijah went still, listening. Sheridan pointed toward the shipping analysis. "We lead with logistics. Let them think rerouting is our primary leverage." Then her finger slid toward the financial section. "And during Q&A," she continued, "we drop the tax exposure." A pause. "Publicly." "No." Sheridan's eyes sharpened. "Strategically." Elijah stared at her for 2 full seconds before a slow smile spread across his face. "Not flirtation. Respect. You want to blindside them in stages. I want them relaxed before we corner them." The approval in Elijah's expression was immediate and impossible to miss. "Jesus," he muttered softly, almost to himself. "You really are terrifying." Sheridan leaned back slightly satisfied. "And yet you hired me anyway." "That may have been my first mistake." The tension between them shifted again after that. Less interview. Less strategy meeting. More two people rapidly becoming aware they worked far too well together. Elijah reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out 2 embossed invitations. "The Metropolitan Club Gala tomorrow night," he said, sliding one toward her. "Kingsley's chairman will be there." Sheridan picked up the invitation carefully. Heavy cardstock. Gold lettering. Exclusive enough to make normal people nervous. "You want to scout him before the presentation. I want to see how he behaves when he thinks he's untouchable." Sheridan turned the invitation over thoughtfully. "Black tie or blackmail?" Elijah laughed softly into his bourbon. "Both." Then his gaze lifted fully to hers, and held. "Wear the red dress." Sheridan couldn't move. There were hundreds of dresses in her closet. But Elijah hadn't said, "Wear something elegant." He hadn't said, "Wear black tie." He had said, "Wear the red dress." The one dress she had never told him about. The one dress he somehow remembered. And for the first time, Sheridan had to ask herself a question she never thought she'd have to answer. How long had Elijah King been noticing her, while pretending he wasn't? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment letting me what you think. Do you think Elijah always had feelings for Sheridan? Or did seeing her again after all these years change everything? What do you think Elijah meant when he told Sheridan to wear the red dress? We'll find out in episode 2.